So this is a follow-on video from using hotkeys and using toolbar assignments to kind of speed up your workflow. Also, what I'm going to go over is the top brushes I use, and as I said in the previous videos, kind of like the top 5 that I'll use to make pretty much everything, whether it's organic or hard surface. So before I get into that, I also want to show a neat trick that I use for changing brush sizes. So instead of coming up into draw sizes icons or pressing spacebar, or you can press S to change the brush sizes, but I like to reallocate that to a brush. You can also press the brackets, the square brackets key, and that's going to basically bring it up and bring it down depending on whether you hold it. A cool feature is you can actually assign that to a hotkey. So if we go up into Z plugin and then into the MISC utilities, you'll see 2 buttons here, which is brush down and brush up. So what I like to do is assign them to the key 1 and the key 2. So it means that while I'm selecting brushes, I can also use my pinky finger or my ring finger to just change the brush size dynamically without pressing anything else. So from the previous video, if you Control Alt and then click that once and then click the desired button, it is going to assign those to those buttons. You might have one already assigned, so you just have to overwrite it. Make sure I've got that one done. So now when I'm holding 2 and when I'm holding 1, I can just adapt the size of my brush. So with that being said, let's go into the brushes. So I'd say my number 1 used brush is clay. I usually assign this to the Q, which is something I use frequently. Clay is one of these brushes which is going to fill in sort of like any details that you've done. As you see, when I apply it, it's going to get rid of details, but it's also a great way of using a mass builder. I use it in very thin and very short light strokes. That's just how I like to use my graphics tablet. Some people might want to use harder strokes and then kind of smooth them over afterwards. But clay, I'd say, is probably the 75% used that I'll have. And that's just used for creating masses and sort of developing silhouettes and things like that. Similar to that is the clay build-up. I assign that to A, so it's just a drop down from that. It's more of an aggressive clay. It's really good for bridging gaps. I use it for. So for example, any sort of pectoral muscle, if you want to enhance that, it's a great way of making that connection almost like a bridge. Whereas with the clay tool, you'll find it's a little bit weaker. So in combination is like, you know, when we're using ZBrush, we can combine different brush techniques to get that desired outcome. So if I was making a pectoral, for example, I'd start to bridge it quite aggressively with the clay build-up brush. And then I'd get the clay to fill in any sort of gaps that I've missed out. I wouldn't tend to use smoothing as I go along because I know it's going to kind of like mess up. I might use it for more of a refinement. I'm pretty okay with just leaving it quite rough and ready. And then filling it in with certain brushes. The third most common brush that I'd use is the dam standard. I assign that to E. So the dam standard, I guess if we're taking this funny peck as an example, is great for etching in details. It's like what it's actually doing is it's using a standard brush at quite a tight resolution, but then also pinching it together. So it's quite a unique brush. It's really good for defining things like bones and muscles. So if I wanted a better definition on the clavicle here, I could go in with a dam standard and just sort of etch it out. And then again with the brushes that we used to maybe fulfill that area. So I could go back to clay, build it up, and then you can see how you can start to make forms by switching through a brush that applies and a brush that kind of like divots itself in. So those are the top 3, and then always when I go through and sculpt things, I'll do a mass smooth, and it just gets me close to like a desire, and then I'll go through and refine it. A next really powerful tool that I keep on W is the move tool. So with the move tool, this isn't as much of a brush as it is a tool. So I can go along and select certain parts of the silhouette and bring them out. That's great for anatomy. So what you'd usually do is you'd insert like some form. So for example, we've just done like a very quick clavicle. Once I've done that, I can start to readjust it and change the shape with that move tool, which is basically just moving and morphing parts of the clay and dragging it around. Again, great for silhouettes if I want to increase a trap or change the size of the delt and then go back over it. So those are sort of the top 4. Very occasionally, at the starts of character development, I'll use something called trim dynamic. So the feature of a trim dynamic is that it's going to almost carve or take off the surface layer of the clay. That can be really useful at the starting points. Is, you know, when you're building up clay, it can be a bit bulgy. It's nice to define certain planes of the head. If you're used to drawing, you understand what planes of the head are. So the harder you press, the flatter it turns it, and it's just a nice way to quite clearly see a standard definition of like where light's hitting and what sort of angles we've got, instead of something that's smooth, which can be sometimes hard to see. So if we were taking any of these, for example, maybe I wanted more definition on and transfer from the clavicle, maybe make it more square. What I could do is just etch those out, or even combine it with dam standard. So once I've done the dam standard, I've got these sort of like bulbous parts that I want to get rid of. I can go back to a trim dynamic and just etch those out and then smooth it over. And you can see how it's made a sharper edge from using dam standard here and trim dynamic there. So funnily enough, that sort of leads on to a brush technique that I like to use for hard surface stuff. So with that in mind, what I could do, say I wanted to make like a little cube. Sculpting a cube can be a bit strange, so I'd use the clay build-up. So clay build-up's sort of going to add a lot of mass and a lot of clay. What I'd then do in combination is switch to a dam standard, and then I'd use the dam standard around the edge to sort of define the base of the cube that I'll be almost using as like an extrude. And then what I'll also do is I'll draw the top surface of the cube, but with the dam standard I'd use alt, which is the opposite of the cavity. It will come out like a peak, and then basically draw a very, very rough square. Now after you've done that, you can use the, depending on how much resolution, we're losing a bit of resolution here, so I might want to divide it. Come into geometry, I've already got some, switch up to 6. So once that's done, I can get the trim dynamic brush and then just start to redefine certain parts of the edge. But an even better one for this is the other brush I use, which is called H polish. What H polish is going to do is it's going to take your kind of like allocated area and try and flatten it as much as it can to I'd say like a relevant edge. So if you see, it's pushing and pushing all the way until it finds quite a harsh edge, and then it stops there. So what you can actually do is start to polish out some more hard surface shapes. So all I'm doing is taking the face of a cube and sort of just trying to construct that out of clay. So it's not super accurate there. So what I might want to do, again, all these brushes have multiple uses when you combine them together. I'd get the move brush and make this edge sort of more square, and then I can keep on going through refining it, make that square, maybe get the dam standard again, redefine the corner, and you can see after a couple of minutes you can get some shape. So really great for making mechanical assets. If I was giving her a breastplate or something, then I would then I'd like to concept it out with basic clay, not fuss about too much with like how it looks, and then I can come back in and refine it with things like the dam standard, turn that inside edge, get a trim dynamic brush, clean it up a little bit, and you can start to see how you can build up forms and refine them later. Okay, just had a very lengthy autosave. The other brush that I use is the Inflate. So the Inflate has a feature that not many brushes can achieve, or the combination of brushes can achieve. So that's why the top 6 are sort of unique in themselves, right? So say for example, we were on this mesh and wanted to increase the size of the breasts. We could go with the clay brush and then do some sort of form and selection. The only problem is it does create these streaks, which can be good for muscles and things, but not great for like, you know, smooth surfaces like the glute or the breast. So I could also use move. The only problem with move is I have to be very tactical, and I have to get the shape perfectly. So while the breast might look good from this angle, I have actually deformed it in different ways that I can't keep track of and keep managing with the move brush. So that's where the Inflate comes in. The Inflate, you can set to quite a large size. It's going to inflate in multiple directions, something that you can't achieve just by eye. So once we do this, you can see you can allocate it to different areas, and then quite naturally do an organic increase and then refine it later. So again, you can combine that with different brushes. So say for example I wanted to increase or make the transition better here, I could come in with sort of like damn standard brushes, follow somewhat of an anatomy, and say bicep, maybe it's quite a stronger person. I'd come in, you know, define these areas, and then maybe come with the Inflate brush and then just increase that with my application. You can see it's inflating up to the extent where I've put in a damn standard transition, and then it's going to be quite a wobbly transition, so you can come back to the move and then work on your silhouettes and bring things in. So those are primarily maybe the top 6 or 8 brushes that I use. In all honesty, I believe I can achieve multiple things. There's not very unique cases where you can't achieve it with these certain brushes. So if you sort of get used to and master those brushes and how they can work together, and apply some sort of workflow for creating like a mass or a shape, then primarily you're going to have a bit of an easy life when it comes to sculpting and art. So that's not to say that the other brushes aren't good. It's just they don't have as much usage as in the amounts of time you use it. So each one of these brushes can really do cool things, and the more you learn, the more you understand. It's like, okay, this brush is really great for what I need to achieve. So let's take an example. I mean, flatten, very, very similar to the H polish. It just has slight different settings. And you also have things like clay tubes. I know clay tubes is very similar to clay buildup, but it just applies in a different way. So my suggestion is don't take these at face value. I'd say in the industry, a majority of people use these, but do find your own workflow and what feels best to you, and then allocate those to your top hotkeys. And so that's how you sort of build up mass and use common brushes.